Hello everyone, welcome to UFO Enigma. I'm Ron Rickey, your host. Okay, now today we're going to finish up on this North Carolina flap that happened last year in '93, and as we go along you'll find out that it's been spilling over a little bit into 1994. And before I even start here, I got all kinds of newspaper clippings. I got 2 months worth, and I've barely scratched the surface, so we got all kinds of information for you. Now, before I begin, I'd like to thank the Stoughton Journal for the nice little article they did on me and the UFO Enigma show. The date line was June 9th, and the reporter was Lisa Campanella. And the headline read, Ron Rickey believes UFOs are out of this world. Now, you might know I got about 6 copies at home. I forgot every single one of them, but they copied one of the girls here copied the headline. So I'll do a little reporting on the report. Now, it was a pretty lengthy little article, and it came for about a 2-hour interview with Miss Campanella. And when she first called me about the show, she would have, she just would have liked to get a 15 or 20-minute interview to get a general idea. I says, okay, but when you come down, I'll have all my stuff spread out, and you can work it from there. And it turned out to be a 2-hour interview. It was like doing 4 shows. Okay, in the article now, it gives a rundown of what goes on in the show, and how we discuss some of the sightings and the history of UFO. And as we were talking, the conversation gradually got around to the Roswell sighting, and I discussed this particular sighting with her at length, as I have done on the program. And it turned out to be a very pleasant experience, and was my first interview, and it really felt good. So we'll look for some more if we can. Now, let's finish up with this North Carolina flap. Okay, as I reported on the last show, it started in early February of '93, and went on pretty heavily through the summertime, and more or less tailed off around November, for a while, that is. Now, this time I did bring the map that I made up, so we can get a general idea of what where the locations were. There we go. Now, as you can see, I put some little pin flags here, and the general area, it's a pretty concentrated area that these sightings are being seen in, around the area of Charlotte. That would be the major city in the area. Okay. Now, I'll just run this down a little bit. The type of UFOs reported were varied. It ran the gamut from cigar-shaped, disc shapes, and deltas, 2 lights in the skies. So when I left off, I was just about to get to the last sighting of the '93 series. Now, this was a sighting observed by a mechanic. Now, this sighting here was of short duration, but it was rather startling. When I was reading it, it just, you could get a good picture in your mind. It was so clear. The incident took place on November 15th at approximately 5:15, which I would say, even in North Carolina, probably it's dark hours, so, and it was near Matthews. Now, this mechanic was driving on US 74, which is a road that came up quite frequently in the last discussion, being in this concentrated area here. Okay, this man was driving along, and an oval-shaped UFO described as being the size of a small house swooped down from the sky right in front of the mechanic's car. Now, the mechanic did say that he was almost run off the road by this UFO coming down on him. I would imagine it was pretty frightening. Now, the disc, after it made its appearance, it then hovered over the road for about 6 seconds. Now, this wasn't granted too long. It's kind of a short duration time period. But when something happens like this, 6 seconds can register in your mind like maybe 6 hours. So after about the 6-second period in front of the car, it shot right back up into the sky where it came from. Now, I just have to point out how startling, whether this was a daylight sighting or not, I really don't know. But this particular sighting does sort of remind me of a scene from a science fiction movie. Maybe you can go back in time and remember, I'm sure everybody's seen it on TV, was Earth versus the Flying Saucers. And the scene I'm talking about portrays a scientist and his wife heading out over the desert. They were heading to their rocket base where they worked, and a flying saucer starts buzzing the car. And not to drift too far from the subject, but it was if you want to see a good UFO movie with excellent special effects, I recommend this movie, and it probably can be bought at any video store or rented. Okay, now that about wrapped up the 1993 portion of these particular sightings, and all these were covered in the Daily Record. Now, the article finished up by claiming, with some claims made by George Fassett, that only 10% of the people who witness UFOs report them. Now, as you might remember, I've used these particular figures on many times, and I guess they haven't changed. So I'm sure we're all familiar with those facts and figures. Okay, now let's get on with a couple of the sightings that sort of spilled over into '94. All right, the first one is from the Gaston Gazette, and the date line was May 2nd of '94. And it was right on the front page of my news clipping service, and the headline was titled, UFO Fever Strikes. Now, according to the storyline, North Carolina may be having the beginnings of its own crop circle mystery, which is kind of exciting. It seems that crushed patents were found in a field covering more than 100 acres, and the field in question lies along the now famous Route 74 in Cleveland County. And as of the writing, it's really undetermined whether whether these marks are the results of a UFO landing in these fields, or if they were made by some more natural causes, maybe a high wind, could be a twister, could be a lot of different things. It's just, I guess, MUFON hasn't really investigated in depth this particular sighting yet. But I'm sure now there will be some follow-up articles. If this is a legitimate UFO circle crop story, I'm going to be looking out for them. I'm sure the clipping service will too, so we'll have some good information in time, probably, hopefully. Okay, the next North Carolina article was sort of a follow-up to the '93 sightings that we've been covering in the last show and a half. And although this article was out of a different newspaper, it was out of the Watauga Democrat, and this was out of the town of Bourne, and date line was February 16th of '94. And it seems like you can almost see the buildup. Hopefully, maybe we might have another Gulf breeze type of a situation on our hands, a little bit closer north. But the article did mainly run through what I've already covered on the sightings, but it ended off by saying just keep an eye on these particular North Carolina papers, because they're sure there's going to be some more really good information. So I'm going to be watching for these stories also. Okay, who knows now? Perhaps these things might drift a little bit more north, and maybe we'll have some of these things. Maybe we'll have some crop circles and stuff. Who knows? Just keep our fingers crossed. Okay, now let's get on with the next article. This is a local one. This one comes from the Boston Globe, and it was datelined April 21st of this year. And the title is ET phone Harvard. And they had some pretty lengthy stuff. They had pictures of the guy that's in there and everything. Now, the story concerns the problems of Professor John Mack of Harvard College. Now, we've also covered some of the story. He has a book coming out, and a few weeks ago, they had sort of a protest at Stonehill on it, and maybe they had something. Maybe there was something to it, because this article here is showing he's having some real difficulties. So let's go through some of the stuff he's been up against. Okay, this John Mack, he's a professor at Harvard, and he's got a new book out, and it's called Abduction. And okay, let's give you sort of a little rundown here. It seems now, according to the article in the Globe here, that one of Mack's patients, Donna Bissett, claimed that she faked the accounts of her supposed abduction by aliens. Now that's pretty heavy stuff. The article also says that Mack failed to obtain consent forms from his subjects. Now, the whole thing, according to this article, which is quite lengthy, I'm just trying to condense it down a little bit, is causing quite a bit of turmoil. Now, the story went on to say that the Professor Mack was just about to go on a huge publicity blitz. Now, this was going to push his book, and he was going to be on shows like Oprah, 48 Hours, People, and Larry King, etc., all those, the big name ones. And so the story said it doesn't know what it's going to do to it, but Mack has met with or treated more than 100 abductees or claimed abductees since 1991. Now, like I said, this is quite an involved article. I won't get too deep into it, but if you remember some of the past shows, we've used references by Bud Hopkins. Now, Bud Hopkins has got a couple of books out, and his name did pop up in this article. Now, Hopkins has, like I said, two very popular books already on the market, and these are Missing Time and Intruders. Now, the story did go on to say that Mack credits Hopkins with helping him fine-tune his technique in hypnotism, in regressing people. And Hopkins, in his latest book, did something like between 60 and 70 people. Now, Mack claimed that he had very little training in this particular field, and as a psychiatric resident himself, he had to teach himself how to do it. So, I mean, we are dealing with a pretty intelligent guy here. Now, the article claimed that Time magazine was one of Mack's loudest critics, and they more or less, I'm pretty sure they broke the story about the girl saying that her story was a fake. Now, I got to go a little bit aside here and make a little comment on the article. You know, these things do disturb me when they happen, because it sets up a lack of trust. When something like this happens, one person can actually throw a monkey wrench into the whole UFO thing in general. And in respect now, let me say, Mac, you know, he may just have some real evidence here in his case files. Like we said, he had over 100 people. And now because of one fake story, some real important discoveries, they may be ignored for a while. They may be shelved. Then again, some people say any publicity is good publicity, so we'll have to see what happens. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot more on this since the book is coming out, and I'm going to get a copy of it. Make sure I get my copy to put on my bookshelf. Okay, now we got a few more little articles to deal with here, and we'll head even further south. And seems like Florida's getting active again. And this article here is from the Islander of Pensacola, and the date line was April 13th of 94. And title was UFO. It was kind of, I think the title was almost as long as the article. UFO vacation UFO's vacation in Florida and light up the state's skies. Wish I was down there watching some of this with my camera. Okay, as you may recall, I've spent extensive time covering what was the UFO buildup and the subsequent investigation of all the UFO sightings in Gulf Breeze, which was a 6-month period that was just totally jam-packed full of good UFO stuff. Now, this article was wasn't by a reporter. This was by a guy named Bland Pugh, and his name is he's the assistant state director of MUFON in the state of Florida. Now, this is a very good article, and I'm thinking about doing a maybe a show about UFOs and the police. Now, this one here starts off. This deals with a couple of policemen, and I've got tons of old stuff that goes back. I was reading one in a Saga magazine about. There's a whole article about UFO and saucers and policemen. So that might just be a good show later on. Okay, as we let's not get sidetracked here. Mr. Pugh, now, he interviewed 2 policemen who were working the late shift. I would imagine now this is graveyard shift 11 to 7. Now, on this shift between the hours of 4:30 a.m. and 6:30 a.m., these 2 policemen made a couple of very good sightings, and we're going to go through them. Okay, now the first object was spotting by the officer riding passenger. He spotted a bright light, and he was about to, you know how you look at something and you look at it for a few seconds, and in your mind, oh, yeah, that's nothing. He was about to write it off as a plane making an approach to a local airport. Now, just without saying anything, he kept on watching for a while, and then he realized it wasn't a plane. You got a pretty good description of it. He described it as a large light with a smaller light trailing along behind it. Now, in between the 2 lights, he could see kind of a wavy tail. It wasn't too distinct between the 2 lights. Okay, now, the officer described this particular object as a smoky, black, perfect oval with a tail. And the officer said that it had the appearance of a hologram as it was waving in and out and becoming transparent. That's an interesting observation, and I don't think really, although a couple of fade-outs were reported in the Gulf Breeze sightings, but this was a good one. Now, as it turned out, the object did make a turn, and he saw that the UFO was, he described, very long, extremely long. And now by this time, he tapped his partner on the shoulder and pointed the object out to him. And I got to step aside just a little bit again and comment. You know, it never really amazes me sometimes. Now, here we have two people, trained observers, and they're sitting side by side in a car, patrol car. Now, they're both looking out the windshield, mainly, and one man sees the UFO and the other one doesn't. Okay, now, this could have a little theory behind it that was more or less generating in my mind, but we'll have to take for granted. No, the one that was driving, he really couldn't notice because he was driving. But it seems that an object close enough and large enough to be spotted with the description the other officer gave should have been spotted immediately by both men at the same time. And it sort of leads you to wonder, you know, if these machines and the people in them have the power to appear just to certain people. Now, we've gone over that in our show with mental telepathy, and can they pinpoint one person out and sort of black his mind, or more or less draw the attention of one man to get his attention, even though they're sitting together? It's an interesting thought. Okay, now let's get back to the sighting. Okay, he tapped the driver on the shoulder and got his attention. Now, when the other officer did see it, it wasn't for very long. They said it just popped out. And they made a couple of very interesting comments, like phrases, "gone like a genie," "it turned out the light," to describe it as it disappeared. Now, how many times have, especially turning out like a light, have we heard that phrase used on the show? The books are full of them. Then it reappeared just as suddenly to the left of them, and got progressively larger. And they said they thought the thing was going to land right on top of the cruiser before it popped out again. Now, think back a few minutes. Doesn't this sound like a lot like the North Carolina mechanic sighting, only the mechanics didn't blink out. It just zipped away at a tremendous rate of speed. Now, the interview was done separately by Pew, and they got a pretty good match when they both gave their answers. And the officers did claim that that when it did drop down, it gave sort of a free fall appearance. They used the description of like a parachute ride in an amusement park, just sort of went down with a floating motion. Okay. The thing disappeared behind some buildings, and they moved on to another location in the cruiser. They started talking, to another officer, but it didn't say whether he was in a cruiser or if he was a foot patrolman. And they started saying that the sky was a brilliant orange-yellow color. And the first officer happened to look back into his rearview mirror, and in the mirror he saw it again. Only this time there were two lights, one on top of the other, and he gave the description of sort of making like a figure eight with the two lights. Now, again, the object flew out of sight and behind some buildings. They did sort of make a small chase. They went behind the buildings, and they found that they had lost it. And for a while afterwards, nothing happened. They were going to do their paperwork, and they spotted another UFO. Now, what was interesting about this particular sighting was that the UFO, as the two officers watched it, the UFO was approached by several airplanes. Now, the policeman noted that as the planes approached the UFO, the object would dim out, and then only to reappear after the planes left the area. So, how many times have we heard that before, especially in the Gulf Breeze sightings? And then again, this article here said that it looks like another flap is building up in the Florida area, so we've got two good areas to concentrate on. And with that, that sort of wraps that article up. And like I said at the beginning of the show, I got all kinds of stuff. I really even haven't touched the foreign stuff. And there's all kinds of things. We got, maybe we might do this one next week. It was one from England, and I did a whole show saying, actually two shows, saying that England has been a hot spot. And in the latest batch of clippings, almost every article is English. So things haven't let down over there yet. They're having just a bigger time as they've had for the past couple of years with their crop circles and planes getting buzzed and fields and stuff. And I'm getting overwhelmed here. I'm going to have to put this away for a minute. There's just too much information for me to contend with. And with that, I think we're going to call that one a wrap. And just keep watching the skies. See you next time.